Dr. Shelest and Mr. Sloboda, pleasure to have both of you. Let me focus on a few strategic issues that a lot of people are watching. First of all, during the conflict, the Ukraine's move about applying for a membership of EU. Now, Dr. Shelest, do you see that will push Russia further to the brink of more military attacks against Ukraine? And also, do you see that's really serving Ukraine's interest for the moment?
It is difficult to say what can move Russia even to more to the brink because what is not the very brink, the open aggression against another country with so many killed civilians and targeting the civilian objects. But if we speak about the European Union membership, Ukraine signed 3 years ago in our constitution that we are asking and we are aiming for the European Union membership. So after this, Ukraine not only signed association agreements and did a lot of reforms and cooperation with the European Union, but we're talking about the application for the membership. What is happening now, this formal application, it was more of the political sign. It was a very clear sign that Ukraine would like to be part of the European Union, the part of the European family where it belongs. And support from the European Parliament has, first of all, this moral signal or symbol that members of the European Parliament support this perspective. It doesn't mean that Ukraine is becoming European Union member tomorrow. We understand perfectly that that is the process of accession and additional reforms that Ukraine need to make. But at the same time, accepting and approving Ukrainian status as the candidate state would be a very powerful signal that Europe consider Ukraine not as some kind of buffer zone, as some countries prefer to say, but as the part of Europe.
Mr. Sloboda, your thoughts about that move?
No, I don't think that is going to help the situation at all. Since the US-backed Maidan Putsch seized power in the country in 2014, the regime has ruined the economy. The country is now the poorest country in Europe on a per capita basis, poorer even than Moldova. And European Union states, whatever the rhetorical flourishes of their parliamentary members, are simply not willing to take on the economic burden of bringing Ukraine into the country and be possibly flooded with migrant labor, of which they already have had, multiple domestic political problems as a result. The EU association agreement, which the ostensibly the Maidan insurrection was about in 2014, the vast majority of that has not been met because it is a very extensive neoliberal shock therapy diktat. It demands the mass privatization of Ukrainian state companies, which employ a huge percentage of the workforce. It would result in the unemployment of millions, perhaps 10 million people in the country, which is why not only could Yanukovych not implement it, but Poroshenko could not implement it, and the new regime ruler, Zelenskyy, cannot implement it. So I'm afraid that any EU ascension is probably 20 to 30 years down the road for Ukraine, whatever, the current rhetoric.
That was just the disinformation. First of all, Ukrainian economy for the last few years, even despite the pandemic, been growing, and GDP of Ukraine being in plus all this time. So Ukrainian economy since 2014 felt itself quite good with the increase in investments. For example, the trade between Ukraine and China raised up to $19 billion. And with the European Union, we have 40% of our trade together already, according to the last 2 years' numbers, as well as to name the events in 2014 as the coup. It seems to me that except of the Russian Federation, all other countries stopped naming it because the people protest when they wanted exactly the European Union membership, and that's why they came to the streets, is also very it's quite a cynical, I would say. But also don't forget the support of the public. The recent polls that appeared just a few weeks before the current military assault of the Russian Federation demonstrated that 70% of the Ukrainian citizens supporting the European Union membership of the country. We've already been enjoying the visa-free regime and open sky and other benefits.
Yeah, the facts remain what they are. Your viewers are intelligent enough to be able to look up the information for themselves and see where the real disinformation lies. The sad fact is that this regime that seized power in Ukraine in 2014 in a violent and unconstitutional putsch is kept alive economically only by a continuous drip feed of money from its Western state backers and the IMF. It is a drip feed that continues to prop up the regime, and for 8 years has allowed that regime to continue its brutal shelling campaign in the east of the country, in the Donbass, to try to subjugate the entire country to the 2014 seizure of power in Kiev.
About the NATO's eastward expansion. Now, Russia consider it, we heard that from the Russian side many times, a danger for Russia, and also believes Ukraine is being made as part of the chess for the West. Well, Ukraine does not seem that way, and also suggests that it is not going to join NATO, but at the same time, it is a partner of the West. So how do you see the NATO issue vis-a-vis the possibility of Ukraine become a neutral state?
Okay, Ukraine was a neutral state up until 2014, up until the government was overthrown. And because Ukraine is a national identity divided country between West and East, that neutrality helped kept the domestic civil balance and stability within the country as well. Once that balance was broken with open foreign interference, and the social political views of one side of the country was forced on the other side of the country, that has led to the international instability in the region. The truth is, of course, that while there is disagreement among many NATO members about bringing Ukraine into the country, and it is not going to happen anytime soon, that on the ground, the military NATOization of Ukraine as a military outpost against Russia and against its own people in the east of the country is ongoing. The United Kingdom has announced the construction of military naval bases in Ukraine. There are some 10,000 NATO trainers and advisors, quote unquote, in the country. And the amount of lethal arms flooding into the country, which for the last 8 years, the regime that seized power in Kiev has used only to mass murder its own people in the east of the country, presents a clear national security threat to Russia.
Let me go to you, Dr. Shalest, about whether Ukraine is or will be a neutral state, whether Ukraine is being used as being accused by Mr. Sloboda and certainly by the Russian side as an outpost of NATO against Russia.
He was right. Ukraine was already neutral in 2014. That didn't stop Russia to occupy and annex our territory, Crimea. It also didn't stop the Russian Federation to bring forces to the eastern regions of Ukraine and to initiate the battles there. Ukraine never been shelling our citizens. However, from Donbass, we now have almost 2 million internally displaced people due to those aggressive actions happening there. We have 14,000 killed civilians over there. The shellings of civilian Mariupol or Slavyansk and other towns, they are all well known to the international media. So Russians can definitely speak about the division of the country, but it seems to me that now it is very clearly when you see how the eastern city of Kharkiv, predominantly Russian-speaking, just because it's happened at the Soviet Union, the prohibition, being heavily shelled by the Russian cruise missiles and other long-range missiles. So for Russia, these motions that they are supporting Russian speakers or they are supporting somebody who didn't want NATO, it's been just a very nice cover-up of the activities. Also, think about this, that just a year before Russian aggression in Crimea and Donbass, Russia had 10 times more of joint events between NATO and Russia than Ukraine had with NATO. And Russia been very actively within the Russian NATO Council and was not speaking about any type of aggression. The military bases Mr. Sloboda talked about, United Kingdom just spent their own money to help Ukraine to restore some of the Navy bases because most of our Navy being in Crimea, currently being occupied by the Russian Federation. So our Navy needed bases for our ships where those who evacuated and the fleet that we are restoring because we are the maritime power. And they are spending their money as the humanitarian to help Ukrainian state to protect. And that's important because now the aggression is happening not only on the north, but there are attempts of the landing operations and the attempts to capture from the seaside as well.
Let me move on to another important question. That is, since Russia and Ukraine are having issues with one another, because mainly out of security issues, at least that's what both sides have been talking about. Earlier, we have been hearing suggestions talking about established mechanism that in Europe that would commonly address security concerns of different sides. How do you see that, of course, beautiful vision for now, but is it achievable? What might be the conditions or what might be the proposals and emphasis from different sides? This time, of course, from Ukraine and from Russia. Let's go with Dr. Celeste first this time.
Security concerns is the nice idea, nobody been opposing it. The question is what is in details, yeah, as devil is in details. So in those proposals that the Russian Federation presented in December, except of the general sentiments, there were also such things as, for example, asking 9 Eastern European countries to left NATO, where they have been members since 2004 or 1999. So definitely that is not demonstrating the willingness for any kind of accommodations from the Russian side.
Russia is not demanding that countries leave NATO, but it is demanding that no foreign forces be placed on the countries east of Germany on a permanent basis in order for a return to those promises and declared principles.
So those proposals in December 2021, they were mostly ultimatums to the Western partners rather than proposals of the joint security arrangement. We already had the Organization for Security and Cooperation of Europe document that could be maybe reformed and discussed. We started some negotiations even back in 2009. But most of the proposals were about the neutrality of the third states and making some states of the second class. When the United States proposed to the Russian Federation to discuss, for example, the demolishing of some weapons or the joint control for the exercises, so the very practical issues, we received from Moscow just the reply, no, we want to speak about the NATO expansion. So it's definitely not about the joint European security, that's just about the Russian claims against the NATO countries, because in these statements, what is interesting, Russia sends them to the United States, not to the European countries, not to Germany and France, for example. So if they would like to discuss European security, not with the European states, but with Washington, it clearly demonstrates that Russia don't care about European security.
Mr. Sloboda from Russia, please.
Yeah, there has been a broad security and stability agreement on the ground since 2015. That is the Minsk Accords. These are accords that were agreed to by the regime in Kiev and the political representatives of the Donetsk National Republic and the Lugansk National Republic in each Ukraine. But the regime in Kiev and its Western patrons have refused for 7 long years to implement the accords. They know very well that the ultranationalist Banderite forces that have formed the vanguard and brown shirts of the regime on the Maidan and since in their punitive campaign to subjugate the people of East Ukraine would revolt. And there would be a second or third, depending on how you count it, Maidan in the country, resulting in the whole house of cards falling down. They cannot implement the accords because they do not even have control over their own militant forces. This has put it in a very difficult situation where the diplomatic resolution that was agreed to by everyone, that was cemented in a UN Security Council resolution and made international law, has been left on the floor for the last 8 years. And the regime in Kiev has made clear repeatedly that they refuse to implement.
Mr. Sloboda suggests, Dr. Shelest, Minsk and more. Is that what Ukraine could accept? What about that commonly addressing security mechanism?
Yeah, first of all, Mr. Sloboda answer clearly demonstrated that Russia is not going to speak about security concerns, because you asked about the European security and he replied with the Minsk agreements. And Minsk agreements, it was the attempt of the ceasefire in 2015 in February for the situation in the east of Ukraine, and they concern just the situation on the east. Probably Mr. Sloboda will talk about elections, the only point that Ukraine have not implemented as for now. And by the way, we signed those documents, you can open them, not with representatives of so-called Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic, but it is the Russian signature there. And within the trilateral contact group, that is Russian representative is sitting and discussing with Ukraine and OSCE all points. So Russia bears the same responsibility over there. But elections cannot happen because there is no security there. Ukraine didn't say that we are not going to organize elections there, but you cannot have elections when you cannot guarantee security, first of all, and it is shelling happening, and you cannot guarantee the access of the internally displaced people. So 2 million people that left Donbass, they also have a right to vote about future of their land. But in general terms, it's also considered that in 1994, Ukraine also rejected its third biggest nuclear arsenal. And we signed so-called Budapest Memorandum, that being signed by Russia, UK, and US, and later China and France supported this document. What is written there, that Russian Federation would never attack Ukraine and would never threaten it with nuclear weapons and so on. So our territorial integrity and sovereignty was confirmed.
All right, thank you so much. And Mr. Sloboda, briefly respond before we wrap up.
Yeah, the refugee situation is serious, and there are 2 million plus Ukrainian citizens that fled the attacks by the regime that seized power in Kiev into Russia. Those millions of Ukrainians living in aggressor Russia have been disenfranchised by the regime that seized power in Kiev. Millions of Ukrainian citizens who are not allowed to vote or have a say in the country's future after being driven out of it by shelling because they are politically unreliable. There is a security and shelling problem in East Ukraine, as the UN report gathered from the OSCE mission clearly shows. 81% of the shelling over the last 3 years and before has come from the Kiev regime forces on the Donetsk and Lugansk republics. Likewise, the vast majority of the violations of the ceasefire have also occurred from the Kiev regime.
Can we ask our guests not to lie openly, because the reports, all of them available at the website OSCE.
They are clearly available, and your viewers can look them up for themselves and see where the veracity lies and where the disinformation is coming from.
All right, then.
The IDPs are living at the territory of Ukraine, not at the territory of the Russian Federation. That's why they called internally displaced people, but not refugees. So these people have been living to the territory of Ukraine to be under the control of the Kiev government, not in the Russian Federation. However, Russian Federation has been illegally issuing passports to Ukrainian citizens and using them in their political campaign.
Why have millions of Ukrainians applied for Russian citizenship?
Please, Mr. Sloboda,
Stop shouting. There is just 400,000, first of all, and then because mostly state servants being made to use them, otherwise they will not be able to receive the social benefits at the uncontrolled territories.
We heard,
secured Ukrainian passports.
We heard both of you, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm sure there are a lot of entangled issues. That's why the negotiators are having very difficult time. However, I hope with your clarification and also your manner in the discussion, many in both the countries could follow as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having
me.
us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shelesta and Mr. Sloboda. Be safe wherever you are. Thank you.